Mr. President of America Donald Trump has always been a figure of immense controversy, yet undeniable political strategy. Whether you support him or not, one thing is certain. He knows how to command attention, shift narratives, and solidify his influence. In his latest speech, he made a move that stands out as one of the smartest political maneuvers of his career. Trump understands the power of messaging better than most politicians. Every word he chooses, every pause he takes, and every phrase he repeats is calculated. His latest speech was no different. While many expected him to stick to the usual themes, he did something that took both his supporters and critics by surprise. He shifted the battlefield of political discourse in a way that will have lasting consequences. By positioning himself as the unwavering alternative to what he calls the failures of the current administration, he played on emotions rather than just policy points. Instead of getting lost in technical details, he painted a broad and compelling picture, one that resonates deeply with the American public, especially those who feel unheard. This rhetorical strategy wasn't just about energizing his base, it was about reaching beyond it. One of the most effective techniques Trump used in his speech was the art of contrast. He didn't just criticize his opponents, he placed himself in direct opposition to them in a way that made him seem like the only viable option. He emphasized key issues such as the economy, border security, and foreign policy, presenting himself as the solution to what he described as a growing crisis. The brilliance of this approach is that it simplifies complex political problems into a clear, digestible choice: strength versus weakness, success versus failure, action versus incompetence. Trump also masterfully controlled the media narrative. He understands that in today's political climate, perception often outweighs reality. By making bold claims and presenting strong visuals, he forced the media to cover his speech in ways that reinforced his messaging. Even when networks attempted to fact-check or criticize his statements, they were still amplifying his key talking points. This strategic manipulation of media coverage has long been one of his greatest strengths, and in this speech, he executed it flawlessly. Perhaps the most significant move he made was tapping into a deep sense of national identity. He invoked themes of patriotism, resilience, and a return to greatness, ideas that have always been at the core of his political appeal. While many politicians rely on statistics and data, Trump leans into emotions. He makes people feel like they are part of something bigger. This emotional connection is what keeps his supporters fiercely loyal, even in the face of controversy. Another key aspect of his speech was his ability to turn criticisms into strengths. Rather than shying away from the attacks against him, he embraced them, using them as proof that he is a political outsider fighting against a corrupt system. This us versus them narrative is incredibly powerful, particularly in an era where many Americans feel disillusioned with traditional politics. By framing himself as the target of an establishment that wants to silence him, he further cements his status as a fighter for the people. His language was also carefully chosen to maximize impact. He used repetition to reinforce his key messages, a tactic that ensures his words stick with listeners long after the speech is over. Simple, direct phrases like "America first" and "Make America great again" are not just slogans, they are rallying cries that shape the way his audience thinks about the future of the country. This level of branding is something few politicians have mastered, but Trump has turned it into an art form. Beyond rhetoric, Trump also made a strategic move by subtly shifting his tone. While he is often known for his aggressive and confrontational style, parts of his speech carried a more measured and presidential tone. This balance allows him to appeal to different segments of the electorate. His core supporters still get the fiery rhetoric they love, while undecided voters see glimpses of a leader who can be serious and composed when necessary. Another brilliant aspect of his speech was how he addressed key voter concerns without alienating potential allies. On issues like the economy and job creation, he made strong promises without diving too deep into specifics. This allows him to maintain flexibility in his messaging while still giving his audience a sense of confidence in his leadership. It's a technique that has served him well in the past and continues to be a crucial part of his strategy. Any politician in modern history. His speeches aren't just words strung together, They're calculated performances designed to captivate his base, rattle his opponents, and shape media coverage in his favor. In his latest address, he made a move so strategic that even his critics had to acknowledge its brilliance. Trump understands that in politics, perception is everything. It's not just about policy details, it's about how those policies are framed, how the public absorbs them, and how the media spins them. In this speech, he seized control of the narrative by delivering a message that was both provocative and reassuring, combative yet unifying, a delicate balance that few politicians can pull off. One of the smartest things he did was to position himself as the voice of the people, not the establishment. He reinforced the idea that he's not just another politician, but an outsider fighting against corruption, bureaucracy, and elitism. This is a tactic he's used since his first presidential run, but in this speech he refined it even further, by painting himself as the only person standing between the American people and what he calls a rigged system. He tapped into the deep-seated frustrations of many voters. Trump also made a masterful rhetorical move by preemptively countering attacks from his opponents. He didn't wait for the media or his political rivals to define him. He defined himself first. By acknowledging criticism while immediately reframing it in his favor, he turned potential weaknesses into strengths. For instance, when addressing concerns about his leadership style, instead of being defensive, he doubled down and framed it as proof that he's willing to take on the establishment at any cost. Another brilliant move was his use of simple, direct language. Unlike many politicians who rely on complex policy jargon, Trump speaks in a way that resonates with everyday Americans. He uses repetition to drive home key points, ensuring that his message sticks. This speech was no different. Every phrase was crafted to be memorable, quotable, and easily digestible. He also strategically used emotional appeals to connect with his audience. By sharing personal anecdotes, invoking patriotism, and emphasizing themes of strength and resilience, he created an emotional bond with his listeners. This is a crucial aspect of his communication strategy. He doesn't just present policies, he tells a story that his supporters feel a part of. Another key element of his speech was the way he positioned his opponents. Rather than simply attacking them, he framed them as part of a larger problem, a broken system that only he can fix. This move does two things. It unites his base against a common enemy and reinforces the idea that his fight is their fight. This us versus them dynamic has been one of his most effective strategies, and in this speech, he executed it flawlessly. Trump also demonstrated his media savvy by making statements designed to dominate news cycles. He understands how the EDI press operates and knows that certain phrases and sound bites will be endlessly analyzed and repeated. By carefully selecting his words, he ensured that the media would focus on the points he wanted them to, rather than the criticisms they might have preferred to highlight. One of the most brilliant aspects of his speech was the way he balanced toughness with optimism. While he painted a dire picture of the current political landscape, he also offered a vision of hope. He didn't just criticize, he presented himself as the solution. This is a crucial tactic in leadership. People don't just want to hear about problems. They want to believe that someone can fix them. By striking this balance, he reinforced confidence in his leadership while energizing his base. Another key strategic move was his ability to appeal to different voter groups simultaneously. He spoke directly to his core supporters using familiar rhetoric that reaffirmed their beliefs. But he also made subtle appeals to undecided voters by emphasizing themes of unity, security, and economic strength. This dual approach allows him to maintain his base while expanding his reach, a critical factor in any election strategy. Additionally, Trump demonstrated a keen awareness of the issues that matter most to voters. He didn't waste time on abstract political theories. He focused on topics that impact everyday Americans: jobs, inflation, crime, border security. By keeping his message grounded in real-world concerns, he ensured that his speech would resonate beyond the typical political echo chamber. Another critical aspect of Trump's speech was his ability to tap into a sense of nostalgia, a powerful tool in political messaging. By referencing past successes, whether in the economy, foreign policy, or national security, he painted a stark contrast between his leadership and the current administration. This technique isn't just about reminding voters of his past achievements. It's about making them feel that those days can return, but only if they support him once again. This strategic use of nostalgia creates a deep emotional response. People don't just process politics logically, they feel it. By reminding them of a time when they perceived things to be better, he reinforced the idea that he is the only leader capable of restoring that stability and prosperity. This "Make America Great Again" theme isn't just a slogan. It's a psychological tool that strengthens loyalty and fuels motivation. Another masterstroke in Trump's speech was his ability to weaponize criticism to his advantage. He thrives on opposition. Every attack against him, whether from the media, political opponents, or even legal battles, becomes part of his larger narrative, one where he is the underdog fighting against a corrupt system. Instead of shying away from controversies, he leans into them, using them to energize his base. In this particular speech, he took anticipated criticisms and flipped them on their heads. If he was accused of being too aggressive, he positioned it as being a fighter for the American people. If he was called out for his policies, he framed them as necessary for the survival of the nation. This ability to reshape narratives is why his messaging remains effective despite the relentless scrutiny he faces. One of the most striking moments in his speech was his direct appeal to working-class Americans. Unlike many politicians who speak in broad terms about economic policy, Trump made it personal. He spoke about the struggles of families, the impact of inflation, the difficulties of small business owners, and the frustrations of everyday workers. By doing this, he made his message relatable and tangible. Instead of abstract statistics, he used real-life examples, stories that resonate deeply with his audience. His ability to create a sense of shared struggle is one of his strongest political assets. By presenting himself as someone who understands the pain of everyday Americans, he strengthens the connection between himself and his supporters. They don't just see him as a politician. They see him as their champion, someone who speaks for them in a system they believe has ignored them for too long. Trump's speech also reflected his unique approach to foreign policy, something that has set him apart from other politicians. He reinforced his stance on national strength, making it clear that he believes in prioritizing American interests over globalist policies. This message, aimed at reinforcing national sovereignty, appeals to those who feel that the U.S. has been taken advantage of in international affairs. By pointing to his past record, negotiating trade deals, brokering peace agreements, and keeping adversaries in check, he positioned himself as a leader who knows how to handle global challenges. He contrasted this with what he framed as the failures of the current administration, making the case that the country needs strong, decisive leadership to navigate a rapidly changing world. One of the most clever rhetorical techniques he used in this speech was his ability to pose rhetorical questions. Instead of just making statements, he asked his audience, "Are you better off now than you were a few years ago?" This method forces people to reflect on their own lives and experiences. It's a powerful persuasion tactic because it makes people come to their own conclusions rather than simply accepting a politician's claims at face value. Another subtle but effective move in his speech was the way he used repetition. Trump understands that in order for a message to stick, it needs to be repeated multiple times. Throughout his speech, he reinforced key themes: strength, victory, patriotism, and the fight against corruption. By constantly bringing these points back into the conversation, he ensured that his audience wouldn't just hear them, but internalize them.